He found the broken crown in the sand, not knowing it was the key to awakening the sleeping Armada. The sky above Vera Prime bled with two suns, twin fires that seared the land into endless stretches of glass and bone. What little wind there was carried with it the dry rasp of sand scraping against forgotten metal, the whispers of wars that had burned out long before any of the living remembered. Rail Corn had walked these wastes before, but never this deep, never this far into the silence. His boots crunched on half-buried wreckage, twisted struts, scorched plating, helmets melted into grotesque shapes. The battlefield stretched to the horizon, a graveyard of machines and warriors alike, their bones ground into dust by centuries of storms. He tightened the strap of the satchel at his side, forcing a swallow from his parched throat. "Scrap is scrap," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "Doesn't matter if it's cursed or forgotten, long as it sells." But even as he said it, a tremor of unease rippled down his spine. Rail had once fought on living battlefields, not dead ones. He'd been a mercenary, hired muscle for whoever paid best. He'd carried rifles and blades under foreign suns, bled for men who remembered his name only long enough to sign a contract. 10 years of fighting, 10 years of betrayal, until the last one nearly killed him. His squad had been left to die on Luther's Ridge, sold out for a heavier purse. He had survived. He always did. But the faces of those who hadn't still followed him, accusing shadows when sleep came. Now he scavenged, because scavenging demanded no loyalty. Metal didn't betray you. Rust didn't stab you in the back. It only waited, silent, for someone desperate enough to dig it out. Vera Prime's graveyard was different, though. The planet had once been the heart of the machine wars, a conflict so ancient that historians debated whether humans had even been involved, or if the wreckage came from species now long extinct. The machines that lay broken here were massive, skeletal titans, war engines the size of cities, their rib cages collapsed, their hollow eyes staring up at the burning suns. Walking between them, Rail felt like an insect crawling through the corpse of some dead god. He stopped beside the shattered hull of a war beast, its armor curled inward like burnt paper. Running a hand along the charred metal, he muttered, "Bet you flattened half a continent before someone brought you down. Now you're just scrap like the rest." The desert didn't answer. It never did. By noon, heat rippled in waves across the wasteland. The light off the broken metal was blinding, forcing him to pull his scarf tighter across his face. His water flask was nearly empty, the last drops sloshing when he shook it. He told himself he'd turn back soon. He told himself there was nothing deeper in the silent graves that wasn't already picked clean. But something kept pulling him forward, an itch beneath the skin, a whisper in the bones. It happened when his boot struck something half buried in the sand. He staggered, cursing, then crouched down to brush the grit away. At first he thought it was another piece of shrapnel, nothing more. But the metal beneath his glove wasn't dull like rusted scrap. It was smooth, strangely cool despite the heat. He dug harder, his heart beginning to thud in his chest. The sand resisted as though reluctant to give up its secret, but then the shape began to emerge. Curved, delicate, a circlet bent and broken, its once perfect symmetry marred by cracks. A crown. Not a human crown, not anything a merchant lord would wear. Its surface shimmered faintly as he lifted it free, pale silver with threads of faint blue veins running like lightning across its surface. Symbols he didn't recognize were etched deep into the metal, faint but unyielding. And when his bare fingers brushed it, the veins glowed faintly, like embers waking in the dark. Rail froze, his throat dry. What in the void? He turned it in his hands, half expecting it to fall apart. Instead, the crown felt heavy, solid, alive in a way no dead scrap should. The glow pulsed once, soft, deliberate, as though answering his heartbeat. "No," he whispered, "not possible. It's just old metal, that's all." But he knew deep down that wasn't true. Every instinct screamed to drop it, bury it again, walk away before whatever curse clung to it sank claws into him. Yet he couldn't. His hand clenched tighter, and the longer he held it, the more right it felt. It was madness. He was no king. He was no chosen one. He was a broken mercenary with scars he never counted and debts he couldn't pay. And yet, when the crown touched his skin, he felt something stir, a faint echo of voices, not words, but the weight of memory. A fleet of ships drifting silent in orbit, waiting. Soldiers kneeling in unison beneath alien stars. A throne carved from crystal and fire. He staggered, shaking his head, but the visions clung to him like smoke. The silence of the graveyard shifted. Somewhere beyond the wreckage, sand crunched beneath disciplined feet. Rail stiffened, hand drifting toward the knife at his belt. Through the glare, figures emerged. Tall, silver-skinned, their bodies draped in tattered cloaks that rippled like smoke. Their eyes gleamed faintly amber beneath their hoods, unblinking, fixed on the crown in his hand. There were a dozen of them, armed, silent, their presence too precise to be scavengers. Rail lifted the crown defensively, ready to run, to fight, to die if he had to. "Stay back," he growled, voice cracking. "I've got nothing worth taking." The figures halted. For a heartbeat, the desert held its breath. Then, as one, they dropped to their knees in the sand, heads bowed, hands crossed over their chests in some ancient gesture. The leader's voice rose, deep and resonant, speaking words Rail couldn't understand, yet somehow felt. "The heir of the Armada has awakened." Rail staggered back, crown clutched tight in his trembling hand. The suns blazed overhead, the graveyard whispered with ghosts, and the silver-skinned warriors knelt before him like he was something more than a man. He wanted to scream that they were wrong, that he wasn't anyone's heir. But the crown pulsed again in his grip, steady, undeniable, like a heartbeat that was no longer just his own. The suns dipped lower over Vera Prime, and the graveyard stretched in molten light, shadows long and sharp across the ruins. Rail Corrin's breath rasped through the scarf drawn tight over his mouth as he stared at the silver-skinned figures kneeling in the sand. The crown still pulsed faintly in his grip, cool against his palm despite the heat, alive in a way that made his skin crawl. The leader raised his head, eyes glowing with that faint amber shimmer. He spoke again, his voice carrying a resonance that stirred something old and unwanted in Rail's chest. The words were alien, guttural yet flowing, but their weight pressed against Rail's thoughts until meaning leaked through. "Heir of the Armada, returned." Rail shook his head violently. "No," he rasped, his voice cracking. "You're mistaken. I'm no one's heir." The figures remained bowed, their devotion unshaken, as though his protest was meaningless, their hands pressed against the ground like supplicants before an altar. And in that silence he felt trapped, not by weapons, not by chains, but by expectation. The silence shattered with the sound of steel striking stone. From the western ridge, more shapes poured into view. Dark armored soldiers with visors shaped into snarling masks. They moved in perfect formation, their steps hammering in unison, dust rising around them. Crossbows bristling with energy charges glinted in the fading light. The Dominion had arrived. The leader of the kneeling ones hissed, his cloak snapping in the sudden wind. "The hunters!" he spat, this time in words Rail understood, though he could not recall learning their tongue. His amber gaze darted to the crown, then back to Rail. "They come for the key." Bolts hissed through the air, streaking past. Sand erupted at Rail's feet, one shot grazing the scrap of metal near his boot. Instinct took over. He threw himself behind the carcass of a war machine, clutching the crown to his chest. The silver-skinned figures rose as one, their spears gleaming, their movements fluid with centuries of practice. With a cry that seemed to shake the air, they met the Dominion charge head-on. Rail's world narrowed to flashes of violence, spears clashing against blades, crossbow bolts finding flesh. The shrieks of dying men, human and not. He tried to crawl deeper into cover, heart pounding, but a voice cut through the chaos. You'll die there if you cower. He spun, knife half drawn, only to freeze. A woman crouched beside him, her cloak blending with the dust, eyes like shards of obsidian locked on him. Her face was sharp, carved by sun and survival, her lips pressed into a line of irritation. A curved blade rested at her hip, its edge catching the glow of the burning horizon. Who? He began. No time, she snapped. Her gaze flicked to the crown in his hand, and for an instant something fierce and unreadable crossed her features. If they catch you with that, you'll wish you had died out here alone. Move. Before he could answer, she seized his wrist and pulled him into motion, weaving through the wreckage with the practiced ease of someone who had survived a lifetime in this graveyard. He stumbled after her, lungs burning, the crown's cold weight bouncing against his chest. Behind them, the battle raged. He glimpsed the silver-skinned warriors locking shields, their chants echoing against the dunes. Dominion soldiers pressed like a tide, their discipline unbroken, their masked faces merciless. The air thickened with the scent of scorched flesh and the hiss of plasma bolts. The woman led him through a narrow cut between two collapsed titans of war, the path swallowed in shadows. The sound of combat dulled behind them, replaced by the ragged rasp of their breath and the hiss of wind through broken metal. He didn't slow until the world around them was quiet again, the suns bleeding into dusk. Rail ripped his arm free, staggering against a jagged panel of rusted steel. What in the void is happening? Who are you people? Why were they kneeling? Why were they attacking? She studied him, her chest rising and falling quickly, yet her eyes never wavered. My name is Solari. Those you saw kneeling are Kareth, the last of a dying line sworn to protect what you carry. The others, Dominion hounds. They will never stop hunting it. Rail held up the crown, its fractured edge glinting in the twilight. It's broken junk. Solari stepped closer, her presence sharp, commanding. It is not junk, it is the crown of silence, the signal key to a fleet that has slept above this world for 1,000 years. The silent Armada. He barked out a laugh, harsh and incredulous. You're insane. This is scrap. It's rust and sand. Nothing more. But the crown pulsed again in his palm, betraying him. Solari's gaze flicked down to the light, then back to his face. It chose you. Rail shook his head, backing away. I didn't ask for this. I don't want it. I'm not. She cut him off, her voice low and sharp. Want has nothing to do with it. The Armada responds to blood, not desire, and yours has awakened it. He opened his mouth to argue, but movement on the horizon silenced him. Dominion scouts, dark shapes cresting the dunes, their armor reflecting the faint light of the rising moons. Solari's hand went to her blade. We move now, or they will pin us here and gut you for that crown. Rail's instincts screamed to run, to leave her, to bury the crown and vanish. Yet something about the steel in her gaze, the certainty in her voice, pinned him in place. Against every survival instinct he had honed across a lifetime, he nodded. They moved again, skirting the edges of the graveyard, slipping between the shadows of war machines. The night air grew colder, the stars burning into clarity above them. Twice Dominion patrols passed close enough that Rail could hear the rasp of their armor plates. But Solari's hand on his shoulder pressed him still, her eyes scanning with the patience of a predator. When at last they crouched beneath the broken ribs of a fallen titan, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. The firelight of Dominion torches danced in the distance, moving steadily closer. They'll keep hunting, she said, voice quiet now, less blade and more stone. Not for you, but for what you carry. They know the Armada waits. They fear it. That crown is the key, and whoever holds it commands what sleeps above. Rail rubbed a hand over his face, the stubble rough beneath his palm. Even if that's true, why me? I'm no king. I'm no leader. I'm a washed-out mercenary who can barely keep himself alive. Solari studied him for a long moment, and in her silence he felt her weighing his words against something unseen. Finally she said, because no one else could lift it. For generations we searched. The Kareth bled to keep it hidden. The Dominions scoured this desert for it, and yet it lay silent until you touched it. That is answer enough. He wanted to scream at her, to throw the crown back into the sand, to demand she find someone else to bear this curse. But as he looked down, the glow threaded faintly through the cracks again, pulsing like a heartbeat. And despite everything in him that resisted, he couldn't let go. The sound of horns carried across the desert, low, guttural notes that vibrated in the air. Dominion hunters had picked up their trail. Celery's eyes hardened. We cannot linger. They will swarm this place by dawn. Rail clutched the crown tighter, its cold weight pressing into his chest. He thought of walking away, of leaving her, of disappearing into the wasteland and pretending none of this had ever happened. But he knew the Dominion didn't forgive, didn't forget. If they hunted this crown, then they hunted him. And though he told himself he had no stake in this war, no place in any prophecy, a part of him already knew. His life had ended the moment he pulled the crown from the sand. The night on Vera Prime was colder than Rail expected. The desert's heat drained with the sun's, leaving only the bite of wind whistling through the broken carcasses of machines. He huddled near the flicker of a small fire Solari had built from scavenged scraps, the crown resting heavy in his lap. Its glow dimmed now, pulsing faintly, as though it too was conserving strength for what lay ahead. Solari sat opposite him, her cloak drawn tight around her shoulders, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. She had said little since they had escaped the Dominion patrols, but her silence was not idle. She watched him, studied him, the way a hunter might watch a dangerous beast she wasn't sure could be tamed. He broke the quiet first, his voice rough. You keep saying that thing's a key. A key to what, exactly? Don't give me riddles. I've had enough of those to last me 10 lifetimes. Her gaze flicked to the crown, then back to him. Not a riddle, a truth. The Armada sleeps above us. Thousands of ships, built before memory, hidden when the machine wars ended. The crown wakes them. To wear it is to command them. Rail barked a bitter laugh, rubbing a hand across his face. Command them? I can't even command myself. You think I'm some lost heir, some chosen savior? You don't know me. I'm a mercenary. I've done things I don't speak of. I've buried men I should have saved. I've fought wars for coin, not justice. If your Armada needs a king, you've picked the wrong damn man. The fire popped, sending sparks into the dark. Celery's expression did not soften, but her voice did. Do you think bloodlines make kings? The Armada has no care for your sins, only your blood. And blood remembers what minds forget. He frowned, staring down at the faintly glowing metal in his lap. Blood remembers. What is that supposed to mean? She leaned closer, the fire painting her face in sharp lines. There are things carried through generations, not memories you recall like stories, but instincts, echoes. The crown binds itself to blood that carries the spark of those who forged it. You held it, and it woke. That is proof enough. Rail wanted to argue, but the truth lodged in his throat like a blade. He remembered the first touch of the crown, the way visions had clawed through his mind, fleets drifting in silence, soldiers kneeling, a throne burning with light. He had told himself it was imagination, heat stroke, madness brought on by thirst. But the glow in his hands was undeniable. His jaw tightened. Even if what you say is true, why should I care? The Dominion, the Careth, your Armada, it's none of my fight. I just want to weigh off this cursed world. Solari's eyes burned. Do you think the Dominion will let you leave? Do you think you can hide while they scour every dune, every ruin, until they find what you carry? You are their fear-given flesh. As long as you breathe, they will never stop hunting. The words hit harder than he expected. He thought of his years drifting from job to job, never staying anywhere long, always hunted by debts or grudges or memories. But this was different. This was not a single warlord or a spurned employer. This was an empire. The night stretched long, filled with silence and distant sounds of Dominion horns echoing across the dunes. Sleep came in fragments, filled with dreams that felt more like memories. A palace carved of crystal, soldiers raising blades in salute, a child's hand clutching a crown too heavy for his brow. He woke with sweat freezing against his skin, the fire long dead. Solari already awake, her blade across her knees as she scanned the horizon. They traveled at dawn, the sun's rising blood red over the shattered desert. Rael's legs ached from the ceaseless march, but Solari moved with a tireless grace, guiding him through paths only she seemed to know. The Dominion was everywhere now, patrols scouring the graveyard, banners of black and silver fluttering in the wind. Twice they were forced to crawl beneath wreckage as soldiers passed close enough for Rael to hear the rasp of their breathing through iron masks. When they paused for water at midday, Rael finally asked the question that had gnawed at him. What does the Dominion want with it? If this Armada is real, why not claim it themselves? Why wait centuries for some fool like me to stumble across it? Solari's jaw tightened. Because they cannot. They have tried. Generations of tyrants have bled their armies searching the sands. They unearthed fragments, weapons, hulls. But the crown remains silent. Without it, the Armada is nothing but bones in orbit. They cannot bend it to their will. That is why they fear it. Why they fear you. Rael shook his head, anger rising. So I'm just a pawn in someone else's game, a tool they can't control, so they'll kill me instead. Not a pawn, Solari said quietly. A choice. You can run, and they will hunt you until they find you. Or you can stand, and you might be more than the man you believe yourself to be. Her words lingered long after they began moving again. He wanted to reject them, to bury the crown in the sand and walk away. But each time his hand brushed its surface, the glow stirred, and the visions whispered. By nightfall, they reached the edge of the burning flats, a wasteland of cracked stone and blistered earth that stretched like a scar across the horizon. Heat radiated from the ground, even in the dark, and the air shimmered with the memory of fire. As they crossed, the land itself seemed to resist them. Rael's boots slipped on scorched rock, his throat burned with each breath, and shadows shifted at the edges of his vision. Solari moved ahead, blade drawn, her eyes alert. The first attack came without warning. From beneath the cracked stone, metal shapes lunged, beasts of the old wars, their skeletal forms reanimated by some dormant code. Their jaws clamped with metallic shrieks, their claws sparking against stone as they bounded toward the intruders. Rael froze, knife half drawn, but Solari was already in motion. She darted forward, her curved blade flashing, carving sparks as she slashed one machine across its neck. It reeled, but two more closed in, their eyes glowing with pale fire. One leapt at Rael. Instinct roared louder than fear, and without thought, he raised the crown in his hand. Light burst from the cracks, a sudden pulse that struck the machine midair. It froze, shuddering, then collapsed with a metallic howl, its systems smoking. Another beast lunged, and again the crown pulsed, its glow flooding brighter, threads of energy crackling across its fractured surface. The machine stumbled, then turned, not against Rael, but toward its own pack, slamming into them with a violent crash. The desert rang with the screech of twisting steel. Sparks lit the flats like a storm. Solari fought with ruthless precision, carving down the ones that reached her. But the tide turned not because of her blade, but because the machines faltered, their coordination breaking as the crown's pulse spread through them. When the last fell, silence returned, broken only by Rael's ragged breathing. His hands shook, the crown still glowing in his grip. He looked at Solari, horror written across his face. What did I just do? She sheathed her blade slowly, her eyes locked on him. You commanded them. No, he whispered, shaking his head. I didn't. I couldn't. You did, she said firmly, and it will only grow stronger. The Armada listens. Even the fragments still buried in this world listen. It is your blood they answer to. Rael staggered back, the crown slipping against his fingers. He wanted to throw it into the sand to crush it under his heel, but he couldn't. Even now he felt its rhythm in his veins, a second heartbeat pounding in time with his own. Solari stepped closer, her voice low but fierce. Do you still think you can walk away? Do you still think you are just a scavenger? The Dominion will burn this world to ash before they let you live. But if you choose otherwise, if you embrace what you carry, you could end their reign. Rael's chest heaved, the weight of her words pressing like chains. For so long he had been nothing but a survivor, drifting from war to war, loyalty to loyalty, until none were left. He had never wanted destiny. He had never wanted crowns or fleets or the weight of a world. But as the glow of the crown bathed his hands, he knew Solari was right. His life was no longer his own. He sank to his knees on the scorched stone, staring into the fractured metal. For the first time, the thought broke through the walls he had built. Perhaps he wasn't running anymore. Perhaps he was being led. Dawn broke over Vera Prime in a wash of blood and gold, the twin suns clawing their way above the jagged ridges. Their light fell upon the shattered citadel, a ruin of obsidian spires and broken walls that once stood as a fortress in the machine wars. Now it was little more than a scar carved into the desert, but its high ground still offered one advantage. From here you could see death coming. And death was coming. Rael stood with the crown hanging from his hand, its broken arc gleaming faintly in the morning light. Solari stood beside him, cloak snapping in the sharp wind. Her dark eyes narrowed toward the horizon. Below, stretching like a tide of black steel, the Dominion army advanced. Rows upon rows of armored soldiers, banners flapping with the sigil of the broken serpent, their boots striking the earth in unison. At their head, astride a massive mechanical beast, rode Arkan Vale. Even from a distance, Rael could feel the weight of the man's presence. His armor was heavier, darker, lined with glowing blue veins of power. A long spear crackled in his hand, its tip humming with lethal energy. His mask was wrought in the shape of a snarling beast. But his voice, when it rolled across the battlefield, was not masked. It was human, deep and thunderous. Return the crown, pretender. Your bloodstains are unworthy. I will take it from your corpse if I must. The Dominion army pounded their weapons against their shields, the sound like thunder rolling through the desert. The Kareth resistance, hidden within the ruins, shifted uneasily. They were brave, but they were outnumbered 10-1. Solari's jaw tightened. If his forces breach these walls, it's over. We cannot hold them in open battle. Rael's throat was dry, but his voice was steady. Then we don't fight his army. We fight him. Her gaze flicked to him, sharp and questioning. You mean to challenge him? He wants me, Rael said, raising the crown. Its glow pulsed, casting threads of light across the broken stones. Not them. If I can bring him down, his men will scatter. Solari hesitated, but then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then you must not fail. If you fall, the Dominion will devour this world. The army halted at the foot of the citadel. Arkan dismounted his beast, the ground trembling under the weight of its iron claws. He strode forward alone, spear dragging sparks across the stone. The Dominion soldiers spread out in silence, forming a circle of black armor around the ruins. The Kareth melted into the shadows of the walls, their amber eyes fixed on the confrontation. Rael stepped out to meet him, every muscle taut, every instinct screaming to turn and run. The crown glowed brighter, answering some call he didn't understand. His hand brushed the hilt of the alien warblade Solari had placed in his belt, its metal cold, alive as though eager for blood. Arkan stopped 10 paces away, his massive frame casting a long shadow. He tilted his head, mask glinting. So this is the so-called heir. I expected more than a scavenger in rags. Rael's grip tightened on the crown. I'm no heir, just a man who won't kneel. Arkan laughed, the sound low and cruel. Defiance is a noble quality. It makes the breaking all the sweeter. The warlord lunged with shocking speed, his spear a blur of light. Rail barely twisted aside, the strike carving a molten line through stone where he had stood. He swung his blade in return, but Arkan parried easily, the clash ringing like a bell. Sparks showered as steel met energy. The duel began. Each strike from Arkan was a storm, heavy, relentless, his strength overwhelming. Rail's arms shook with each parry, the impact rattling through his bones. He fought like a man drowning, every move survival, every breath borrowed. The crown pulsed at his hip, urging him, guiding him. His body moved where thought failed, ducking under a strike, spinning aside just in time. The circle of soldiers roared as their lord pressed the attack. Rail stumbled back, his boots sliding across the dust. A slash across his ribs seared white-hot, pain ripping through him. He gasped, teeth clenched, forcing his blade up to catch another blow that nearly drove him to his knees. Arkan loomed over him, eyes blazing through the mask. You cannot win, pretender. You carry the weight of kings, but you have no crown upon your brow, no throne beneath your feet. You are nothing but a shadow wearing dead men's bones. Rail's vision swam, but in the blur he saw flashes, faces from dreams he did not own. Voices calling his name in languages he had never learned. Soldiers kneeling. A fleet drifting. A child's cry in the night. No, he rasped, his voice raw. I am not nothing. He surged forward, his blade moving with a speed that startled even him. The crown flared, veins of light racing through its cracks, and the war blade in his hand answered. For the first time, Arkan staggered back, his spear struggling to keep pace as Rail pressed him. The soldiers shouted, the circle vibrating with shock as the balance shifted. Celery's cry rang from the ruins. Strike him down! Arkan roared, fury blazing. He drove his spear downward in a crushing arc, the ground shattering under the force. Rail twisted inside the blow, the edge of the spear grazing his shoulder. Pain flared, blood hot against his skin, but he ignored it, stepping in close. The crown blazed with light, brighter than the sun's, casting shadows across every armored face watching. Guided by instinct deeper than thought, Rail drove his blade into the gap beneath Arkan's arm, sliding past steel into flesh. The warlord's bellow split the air, rage and disbelief entwined. His spear clattered to the stone as his knees buckled. For a heartbeat the world froze. The Dominion soldiers stared in stunned silence, their leader impaled, the crown burning like a star in Rail's hand. Arkan gasped, his voice broken. Impossible! You are no heir! Rail's eyes burned as he wrenched the blade free. Maybe not, but I am the end of you. The warlord collapsed, his armored bulk crashing against the stones, dust rising around him. Silence held for a long moment, broken only by the hiss of the wind. Then from the shadows of the ruins, the Kerith began to chant. Their voices rose, low and steady, echoing off the broken walls. The Dominion soldiers faltered, their formation wavering. Some threw down their weapons, fleeing into the dunes. Others simply knelt, heads bowed, broken without their master. Rail stood trembling, blood soaking his side, the crown still glowing fiercely in his grip. Solari emerged from the shadows, her eyes wide, her expression torn between triumph and awe. She touched his arm, steadying him. You did it, she whispered. He looked down at the body of Arkan Vale, then up at the sea of soldiers scattering into the desert. His chest heaved with exhaustion, with pain, with something that felt too heavy to name. No, he said, his voice quiet, hoarse. Not yet. Above them, the sky answered. A deep vibration shook the ground, so low it seemed to come from the bones of the planet itself. Rail's head snapped up, the crown burning hotter, brighter, until it was almost unbearable to hold. Far above, beyond the light of the suns, shadows stirred, vast jagged shapes shifting against the stars. The silent Armada was waking. The Dominion soldiers broke entirely, fleeing in terror as the first of the great warships ignited, lines of blue fire crawling across their ancient hulls. The air thrummed with their awakening, a chorus of engines that had slept for 1,000 years. The Kareth fell to their knees, voices lifted in reverence. Celery's hand tightened on rails. "You've done more than kill a tyrant. You've called the Armada." Rails stared at the sky, the crown searing against his palm. He should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt the weight of 1,000 dead kings pressing onto his shoulders, demanding answers he did not yet have. "I didn't mean to," he whispered, the words lost in the roar of ships breaking their silence. The dawn flared brighter, painted not by suns but by the awakening fire of a fleet that had waited for him, whether he wanted it or not. The fleet burned in the skies of Vera Prime. Ancient warships, vast and jagged as mountains, drifted from their long slumber, their hulls awakening with pulses of deep blue light. Engines that had been silent for 1,000 years rumbled like thunder. Across the shattered citadel, the Kareth knelt with their foreheads pressed to the ground, voices raised in chants that carried like a storm wind through the ruins. Rael stood amidst it all, the crown blazing in his hand. His breath came ragged, every muscle trembling, blood seeping from the wound across his ribs. He felt Solari's hand on his shoulder, grounding him, steadying him against the tide of awe and terror that threatened to sweep him away. He whispered, almost to himself, "I didn't ask for this." Solari's gaze was fixed on the sky, her eyes reflecting the fire of the Armada. "No one ever asks, but it has come, all the same." The Dominion soldiers had scattered in panic. Some threw down their weapons, others fled into the desert, their order collapsing without their warlord. The battlefield that had moments ago been filled with the clash of steel now lay hushed, broken only by the chanting of the Kareth and the distant roar of awakening ships. Rael sank to one knee, clutching his side. The crown glowed brighter in response, its fractured edges humming with power, as though the Armada itself could feel his weakness. He wanted to throw it down, to cast it back into the sands, to scream at the universe for burdening him with something he had never wanted. But when he looked at the faces of the Kareth, their reverence, their hope, he could not move. Solari crouched beside him, her expression unreadable. "They will see you as more than a man now. You've slain their tyrant, and the Armada wakes at your call. Whether you accept it or not, you are their symbol." Rael closed his eyes. The word tasted bitter. "Symbol. You are alive," she said softly. "That is more than they had yesterday. That is hope." He let the words hang, heavy between them. The fires of the citadel smoldered, painting the sky in smoke. The Armada above shifted slowly, massive silhouettes casting shadows that stretched across the desert floor. Rael's grip on the crown loosened, and he felt its pulse ease as if it too waited for his choice. By nightfall, the ruins had been transformed. The dead were gathered, their bodies wrapped in cloth and laid in neat rows, the Kareth singing low songs that carried grief and pride in equal measure. Fires burned along the walls, keeping back the desert chill. Children crept out from hiding, their wide amber eyes staring at Rael as though he were a story come to life. He stood apart, leaning against a cracked pillar, exhaustion pulling at him. Solari joined him, silent for a time before she said, "They will expect you to lead them, to wield the Armada as a sword against the Dominion, to claim a throne of iron and fire." "And what do you expect?" he asked, his voice flat. She met his gaze steadily. "I expect you to choose, to be more than a weapon or less. That is yours alone to decide." He looked up at the sky, at the Armada's endless hulls drifting like ghosts above the clouds. They filled him with both wonder and dread. To command them was power beyond imagining, but also responsibility. They could end the Dominion. They could also burn worlds to ash. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled long and heavy. "I don't want to be a king." Her expression softened, almost a smile. "Then don't be. Be something else." The days that followed blurred into one another. Word of Arkanvil's fall spread like wildfire across the desert. Broken Dominion patrols deserted their posts. Some sought to surrender. Others rallied under new warlords, determined to crush the spark before it became a flame. The Kareth gathered in greater numbers, caravans arriving from hidden camps, their warriors pledging themselves to the man who had slain their enemy and awakened the Armada. Rael listened to their vows with unease. They called him the Keeper of the Crown. The blood voiced the air returned. Each title felt like another shackle. He slept little, his dreams haunted by visions of ships drifting in silence, of thrones crumbling, of fire consuming entire worlds. Each time he woke with the crown burning faintly at his side. Solari was always near, her presence a constant tether. She counseled him when doubt threatened to consume him, argued with him when he tried to withdraw, reminded him, sometimes harshly, that survival was no longer his only task. More than once their arguments flared into raw anger, but always ended with silence that carried more truth than words. One evening, as they stood at the edge of the citadel, watching the desert winds sweep over the graves of the fallen, Solari said quietly, "You could vanish, you know. Take the crown and leave this world. Let the Armada sleep again." Rael looked at her, his face tired, scarred by battles he had never wanted. "And how long before the Dominion finds it? How many more lives will be lost while I hide?" She nodded slowly as though she had expected that answer. "Then you understand. You may not be a king, but you are a keeper, and keepers do not abandon what they guard." The words lingered in him, settling like stone. The final test came a week later. A surviving Dominion commander, desperate to claim the crown, led a raid on the citadel with hundreds of soldiers. The battle raged through the night, the ruins burning once more. Rael stood with the Kareth, crown in hand, and for the first time he did not resist its call. When he raised it high, light lanced into the sky. The Armada answered. From the heavens descended 3 colossal warships, their engines shaking the desert floor. Their weapons hummed, ready, but they did not fire. They hovered above the battlefield, silent sentinels, their mere presence enough to break the Dominion's will. The raiders fled in terror, leaving behind their dead and their fear. The Kareth cheered, their chants echoing into the night. But Rael only stood beneath the Armada's shadow, the crown heavy in his hand. He understood now. It was not his weapon. It was his burden. To wield it carelessly was to risk turning hope into terror. To guard it was to ensure it would never fall into the hands of tyrants again. When dawn came, he gathered the Kareth before the citadel. His voice carried over the broken stones, rough but firm. "I am not your king. I will never sit a throne. But I will keep what I have awakened. Not for myself, not for power, for all of you, for this world and the worlds beyond. The Armada will not be a sort of conquest. It will be a shield, a promise that no tyrant will rule unchecked again." The words spread among them like fire, and for the first time since he had lifted the crown, he saw relief in their faces instead of blind worship. They did not need a king. They needed someone who would stand with them, not above them. Solari stood at his side, her hand brushing his, as the chants began anew. Keeper, they called him, Keeper of the Armada. He let the crown hang at his side, its glow steady, no longer fighting him, no longer dragging him. It had accepted his choice. Or perhaps, he thought, it had only been waiting for him to make it. As night fell again, he stood with Solari at the edge of the citadel, looking up at the vast shadows drifting among the stars. The Armada moved slowly, patiently waiting. He felt its presence not as a command, but as a bond, a silent promise shared between ancient steel and his blood. "I was a mercenary," he said softly, almost to himself. "I fought for coin, for survival. Now I fight for something else, somewhere worth guarding." Solari's gaze lingered on him, her voice low. "And you no longer fight alone." The desert wind carried their words into the night. Above them, the Armada gleamed like a second constellation, eternal and watchful. And in that light, Rael felt something he had not in all his years of wandering. he felt he belonged. The legend would grow in the years to come. Stories whispered of the man who found a broken crown in the sands and awakened a fleet that could level worlds. Some said he was a king reborn. Others said he was chosen by fate. But those who knew the truth called him something simpler, something truer. Rael Corin, the keeper. And as long as the crown pulsed with light, as long as the Armada hung above the skies of Vera Prime, hope would remain. Not the fragile hope of prophecy, but the hard, unyielding hope born from choice. Even in the desert of silent graves, life had risen again. The end.